I wanted to take a little bit of time to just talk about some resources and some different ways that people might be able to get support around these issues. So, what else can you tell us about strategies for empowering ourselves towards greater awareness and freedom from these myths?
Yeah, I think there's some great books that have been written on these topics, specifically from the evangelical Christian perspective, which is where most of my knowledge is. So I always recommend the book Pure by Linda K. Klein. The book Church 2 by Emily Joy Allison is came out earlier this year, and it's a very well written, well researched look at how purity culture specifically leaves people and churches and communities and systems open to abuse, and how those two things are actually tied very closely. That purity culture, doesn't actually disempowers people to the point of making them vulnerable to abuse, and then what to do about that, right? I also There's a lot of websites and resources. I always direct people to maybe think outside the box a little bit.
Hmm.
So if you're someone who grew up in a white community, a white church, make sure that your deconstruction is not just following other like people of the same ethnicity or culture that you are. None of this is new, right? There have actually been people critiquing cultural norms for generations. And so read queer people, read Black critiques of sexuality and Christianity, read about Asian experiences with being sexualized or being considered, the model minority and sort of co-opted into whiteness. Read outside of your own experience. And I think that's one of the best things that you can do to deconstruct and to decolonize these ideas of purity or the moralism that we have in the United States. And so read broadly, read freely. If something's not your jam, like close the jar and grab another jar of jam. That this is lifelong work and that it's fun and that it's enjoyable to continue to learn and express yourself. Lots of resources out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say again that we will have links to so many of the things that we've talked about in the show notes description of this episode, whatever platform that you are finding this on. Beyond that, do you have any strategies you can recommend for how to notice these things? Because we highlighted here some 6 or 8 different myths that I think show up in kind of like subtle ways in our lives, but beyond like calling attention to those particular things, I think it can be really easy for these ideas to sneak up on us. So, how do we become more aware of them and know that there's deconstruction to be done?
Right. I think one of the big signals for me is noticing whether or not something I believe actually applies to everyone or it's just something that I'm holding on to at that time. Right. Anytime that I start making decisions for other people outside of some basic ideas of consent, and moral, ethical positions of, recognizing power differentials and not abusing anyone, my ideas are just my ideas. And I might hold different ideas in the future. I've certainly held different ideas in the past. So recognizing and checking your idea, does this actually apply to everyone? Is this a sort of ethical position or is this just a preference? And if it's a preference, own it. It's all yours. You get to prefer whatever that is that you prefer at this moment. But recognize that like it's not for everyone and it's maybe not for all time.
Hmm. Yeah, that is fair to say. Now that I'm like this sort of pseudo quasi celebrity with the Atheist Experience Network, I have thought about whether or not I should go back and maybe get rid of that old Twitter account or some of these different things. And I have certainly left it up because, while there's nothing maybe terribly egregious, there are certainly things that come up in my, my time hop or my memories or whatever else online that remind me that, yeah, oof, I definitely had some very different beliefs than the ones that I hold now. And I think that this is a ongoing mission. You talked about the notion of deconstructing as a like daily ongoing task. And I want to encourage everybody watching this show to keep watching shows like this, to keep exploring, to keep questioning, to continue to be skeptical about what is healthy and what is serving you now, here, and today, because these are complex issues and our culture is always moving forward, but not necessarily in the right direction, just forward. Well, beyond that, before we wrap up for the night, were there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I'm just still resonating with this idea of pleasure, as I have been for a few months, just like different
Mm,
readings. I like to sort of find an idea and then just see where it shows up. But pleasure is valuable, and I think pleasure is a resource, and pleasure will lead to more pleasure. Pleasure in sex and outside of sex. Like, what is pleasurable in your life? What is pleasurable in the world? What should we offer and encourage more pleasure in? And if you follow that idea, you'll probably have a lot of fun. And hopefully it will give you a lot of enjoyable experiences to take through some of the difficulties that we're also facing now.
yeah, well said. It can seem frivolous from the outside, but I can't help but feel like the responsible and ethical search for pleasure is what we're here to do. It's the meaning of life, in that life has meaning, whatever we construct that to mean. I think that the seeking out of pleasure, whether we're talking sexual, romantic, or otherwise, is terribly central. So thank you so much for sharing these ideas with us and walking us through all of this. I'm going to give our crew just a moment to throw some links up on the screen, but tell folks where they can find out more about you and about your work.
Yeah, the best way to find me is on Instagram right now. I'm Emily Maynard _THX. If you are in California, I can only work with clients who are in California. But if you are and you're interested in having more of these conversations in a therapeutic context, feel free to reach out. You can contact me through my Instagram. There's lots of ways to find me and find more about my work if you're interested in working with me.